So my name is Roy Alexander. I've been associated with this group for about 8 years. I was an evangelical Christian for about 35 years. And for 20 years, I was in ministry. I was a pastor for 10, and then I did fund development for a Christian nonprofit organization that you all would hate for about 10 years. And then I started reading the wrong books. I started reading the wrong books, and then everything went to shit. To Hemant 8 years ago, this coming fall, and I had been deconverting for about 10 years, from 06 to 16. I've been reading the wrong books and talking to the wrong people. And then I was surfing, and I was looking at some of these videos, some of the books, Sam Harris, what's it called? The Letter to a Christian Nation was really impactful. Dan Barker was impactful. Religulous was impactful. Non-Stamp Collector, I don't know if you remember that guy. And then Friendly Atheist. I could not do Hitchens. I couldn't do those guys because I was still a Christian, and I just felt attacked when I listened to them. But I could do the Friendly Atheist. And I'm naive about all this stuff. I don't know if I ever talked to an atheist. I just talked to other Christians who knew what the atheist argument was. You can guess how bad that turned out to be. So I Googled, I wonder if this guy does any public speaking. And it turns out he was speaking 3 weeks from then up in Edmonton, which was this conference I went to. And so I got in the car 3 weeks later. I had left ministry 2 weeks before that. And I was shell-shocked. So I came up to Edmonton and I met a bunch of people and trying to figure out the culture. There was a lot of tables like this, people sitting around drinking coffee. I thought it was a church plant. But then I saw the tables on the side, and there was someone selling little golden altars where you could sacrifice animals, and I knew I was in the right place. Hemant, come on forward, and thank you so much, because you really did have an impact on my life. I appreciate it.
I'm going to grab this out of here. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Okay. I hope this is working all right. Oh, it looks like it is. Good. Hey, thank you for having me here. My name is Hemant Mehta. Go to friendlyatheist.com. You can find my stuff. I'll show you that at the end. Thank you to all the organizers of this conference. This is really wonderful to see, because during the pandemic, I also missed this in-person interaction. It means so much. So the thing I wanted to talk about with all of you is something that was near and dear to my heart for the past almost 2.5 decades now. I'll give you a brief history and then I'll move on to actual stuff. I came into atheism after high school, looked at stuff online. Everything I found when I was curious about religion and atheism, I didn't know the word at the time, it all looked like it was shady people writing things from their basement, but it made sense. And the more I read about it, I'm like, oh, I don't think my religion is wrong. I don't think my religion is wrong. I think religion is wrong. And then I went down the rabbit hole that I'm sure so many of you have gone down, which is, oh, this stuff starts making sense, like Roy was just saying. And so I formed a group similar to this one at my college. I got involved with some of those national nonprofit groups, joined their boards. Like, this was my life for quite some time, because it's one of the few things I was passionate about. And I'm sure, raise your hand if you came up as an atheist around the time all that new atheism stuff was happening. How many of you does that involve? A good chunk of the room, and maybe other people came to it a little later. But let me show you this, which is that doesn't seem to be popular much anymore. I'm going to depress you for like 10 minutes, and then I promise we'll get more optimistic. But this is like one of those Google trend charts, specifically of the phrase new atheists. And you don't have to understand really what the graph is saying, but it's saying that this is from 2007 till today. And basically what this is saying is on the far left of that graph, you see that spike at the very beginning. That's when new atheism was at its most popular. It's at 100%. And when it comes to how many people are searching on Google for the phrase new atheists, over time you can see it has decreased quite a bit. No one is searching for that term anymore. It's relatively rare. It's not as popular as it used to be. But maybe you think, okay, well, that's just a very specific phrase. Of course, people aren't going to search for that. What about the phrase new atheism? It's a little broader. You can see relative to that first one, now the trends are the same. No one's really searching for that one either. But okay, let's go even broader. Let's just search for the term atheist or atheism. What happens then? Of course, because it's one word, it's something people look up a lot more, so it's going to dwarf these numbers here. But look at this yellow on the graph, which is to say if you search atheism, it is something people used to search up in 2007 a lot more than they do today. The thing that brings all of us together, and that I'm sure so many of you in this room are passionate about to some degree, is just not a thing people seem to care about as much anymore. Which is like, oh, that's the thing I liked, and now the fad is over, or something like that. It seems kind of depressing. And I also think there are other reasons to show that, all the atheism stuff that seemed to be so popular years ago, not as popular as it used to be. I'm trying to give you data points to try to make this theory work. I took this screenshot last week. It is the best-selling books about atheism on Amazon. And even if you can't see all the titles, you could see some of them. What you notice here is that at least half the books on the list are the same books that came out like in 2006, 2007. You see God is not great. You see the God delusion. You see the, quote, new atheist authors. Virtually none of these books were written in the past 5-6 years. Which is to say, yeah, if people are talking about atheism or they're curious about it, what are they reading? What are they picking up? It's the stuff that was written almost 2 decades ago at this point. And this is true of books of any flavor. Fewer people read the new stuff. They go back to the old classics. But that means our movement, for lack of better words, is still being shaped by what those guys wrote. And they're all guys. Wrote like a couple decades ago. And every now and then you will see a podcaster, a YouTuber, they come out with a new book, and that's exciting, and they'll be like one of the best-selling books today, but the question is how much of that has staying power, because that's what's going to shape how people think about this thing we're interested in, and it looks like, by and large, no matter when you pull up a list like this, no, it's still Dawkins, it's still Hitchens, for better and for worse. By the way, there are a few books on here that are not even written by atheists. They're written by Christians saying, oh, the God delusion is popular? Well, I'm going to write a book responding to the God delusion. And that's more popular than books about atheism, which is kind of frustrating, but it happens. Here's another data point for you. In 2012, they held this big Reason rally in Washington, D.C. to try to bring together as many atheists as possible. It's hard to get an estimate. That's a picture I took. That's Dawkins on stage there, but I think estimates range from 20 to 30,000 people. How valid is that? I don't know. But they tried to do it again in 2016 when the stakes were even higher, politically speaking. I was there for that one too. I can't tell you what the number of people was, but anecdotally, it was a lot smaller. It was a few thousand people. Like even by 2016, the interest in that event or that movement of sorts had gone down quite a bit. I'll give you one last data point here. I apologize for the picture. Listen, we got a lot of things wrong. In the 2006 era and like a few years after that, they would invite a lot of atheists to go on TV to debate whatever church-state issue was happening at the time. That was Dave Silverman, at the time was president of American Atheists. That picture became a meme. Like, Bill O'Reilly was like, come on Fox News, debate me on something. And of course, it's a ridiculous debate. But I'm telling you, they don't do that anymore. I mean, even if you look at Fox News, I think they realize, why would we bring them to us when we could just talk about them without them even in the room? It's a lot easier. So there are a number of atheist organizations. They don't get invited to, and it's not just Fox News, they don't get invited to national TV spots to talk about issues, even though church-state separation is always very much in the news. It just doesn't seem to happen as much. I'll give you one last one, sorry. There's one more, which is that the number of websites, the thing that drew so many people to atheism, because if you didn't read the books, maybe you stumbled across a website or something like that, even those have disappeared. I I started in this world as a blogger. Guess what? They don't exist anymore by and large. Even a couple of years ago, this was a website called Only Sky. The idea being, let's bring together all these people who are writing from an atheist perspective about whatever it is they care about. That was from like a tech entrepreneur saying, let's invest some money in this and try to make it work. Guess what? Didn't work. It's frustrating, but that's kind of the direction we're going. It doesn't feel like there's a lot of enthusiasm for this issue that so many people in this room care about. But, okay, I'm done with the depressing part of this talk. Let me tell you why there's still reason to be optimistic, though. And I'll start with this. This is a graph from a Pew Research Center study. And basically, over the past 15 or so years, this graph goes from 2007 to 2023 on the right. What you can see is that all this thing that we have been thinking about, arguing about for so many years, it is having an impact. So this is the percentage of adults in the United States who are now religiously unaffiliated. They're not necessarily atheists, but they say, I want nothing to do with organized religion. And I know it dips down at the very end. Maybe that's a future trend, I don't know. But by and large, this thing is going up and to the right. The number of people who are non-religious in the US has gone up almost twice it's doubled since 2007. That is wild. Here's another interesting data point. This is the share of each generation that is religiously unaffiliated. And even if you can't see everything, a couple things to point out here. You could see the line, the yellow line at the very bottom. We're talking about kind of the oldest people in America. Like overall, they're super religious, but even then, the oldest Americans, the greatest generation, born in like the 1920s or so, you could see that number slowly going up by the end. This is going from 1978 to 2018, but you could see that number goes up. Even for the oldest Americans, it goes up. They're becoming a little less religious, at least organized religion. You could see the dark blue line. That's for the boomers. Same thing. It goes up a little bit. You see Generation X at the top there, also going up. So the question is, what about the younger generations? What about Generation Z? What about the millennials born like after 1980? Guess where they are on this chart? You have to like create a new part of the axis for them. Yeah. That means, again, how many of you went to school, high school, college, whatever it was, where you didn't really know any other people who were non-religious? That was certainly my case. And now it feels like if you go to a large public school of any kind, you can't move your arms around without hitting someone who's non-religious, which makes it easier to find community, which means saying you're non-religious doesn't have the stigma, maybe, that it used to. Depends on where you live, but you get the idea. Younger people are growing up in a world where religion doesn't have necessarily the big impact it used to, which is a huge shift. Here's another way of looking at the same thing. This is from the General Social Survey. I believe it's done every 2 years, which explains the numbers at the bottom, but it's just a huge survey, lots of data points. This is the percentage of Americans who say, I know God exists, and I have zero doubts about it. If you remember from the God Delusion, Dawkins had this like spectrum, like 1 means I'm 100% sure God exists, you can't convince me otherwise, I know it's true. 7, let's say, means there's no God and I'm 100% sure of it. And Dawkins was like, I'm not at a 7, I'm like at a 6, because that's the amount of certainty I can put to this. Well, these are people who are at a 1. And you could see the dot there. It's around like, what is that, 60, a little above 60% there. That was back in 1988. And the reason I want to show you this is what happened when they did this survey last time and published the results. Here's what happened in 2021. It dipped below 50% for the first time ever. That means more than half of Americans involved in this survey, representative of this survey, they said, you know what, I have at least some doubts. Which again, why do they have some doubts? For a whole bunch of reasons that you would need a thesis to understand. There's so many reasons. But it means those books, those podcasts, all of you, the people working with various groups, it's having an impact. People are starting to doubt their religion for various reasons. So the question is, why is this happening? Why are these trends all going in this direction? Well, let me show you one of my favorite pieces about this. It's by the sociologist Phil Zuckerman, and he was trying to explain why are people moving away from organized religion, because everyone here, especially people who grew up in religious communities, you know why you want to belong to a group like that. Forget the beliefs for a second. You get community. You have a sense of belonging. We know why religion can be powerful. So why are people moving away from that? Phil wrote this article for Salon several years ago, but I love it. And if you can't see that bottom, let me read this for you because I think it's useful. In terms of who supports helping refugees, affordable health care for all, accurate sex education, death with dignity, gay rights, trans rights, animal rights, and as to who opposes militarism, the government use of torture, the death penalty, corporal punishment, and so on, the correlation remains. The most secular Americans exhibit the most care for the suffering of others, while the most religious exhibit the highest levels of indifference. It doesn't seem to matter what issue you talk about. If you're looking for people who are invested and who care about a lot of these issues, you'll find it in rooms like this and not necessarily in a large non-denominational megachurch. And obviously, there are churches that care very deeply about all this stuff. But this is a reason so many people are like, I don't think I can belong in this community, this religious community. Let me give you some numbers to go along with this. This just came out a couple weeks ago. It's from a group called PRRI. They do a lot of surveys too. They asked people, if you left your childhood religion, why did you leave it? And they asked people, what you want to look at is the green lines, because those are the recent answers they had. And again, why did you leave your religion? The most popular answer, and you could give more than one answer, is, well, I stopped believing in its teachings. No surprise there. Yeah, that's why a lot of people leave religion. But why else did they leave? The second most popular answer, the way we treat LGBTQ people, specifically gay and lesbians in this survey. Your family was never that religious growing up, which is interesting because a lot of us, even if we're atheists now, you grew up with religious parents. What happens when you start having parents who are non-religious and not passing that along to their kids? That's going to be interesting. This is a new one. They didn't even ask this in 2016. It's bad for my mental health. That's a reason a lot of people gave. A third of people said, yeah, that's the reason I wanted to leave my church. Then you get to church sex abuse scandals. Then you get to we're too political. And in an election year like the one we're having in the US, guess what? A lot more churches are going to get a lot more political. So that's not going to go away too. A lot of this stuff, these are self-inflicted wounds, but some of it is stuff we can educate people on as well. Here's another way of looking at this. Abortion, obviously a big issue in the United States right now for many reasons, but this is a survey. I know it's hard to read, but that's okay. That middle dark blue line shows you where Americans are at in general, and this is before Roe v. Wade was overturned. It said that 57% of all Americans believed abortion rights should be legal. You should be allowed to get an abortion. But the thing I want to ask you is this is divvied up by religion. Where are atheists on this list in terms of who says women should have the right to have an abortion? Atheists are way up there. We are at 87%. The Unitarians are beating us by a couple of percentage points. But that's where atheists are. And at a time when abortion is a huge issue in the US, who do you look for to say which groups of people are defending abortion rights? It's atheists. It's not name your church, insert church here. Here's another version. What about people who accept trans people? And not even accept, that's going too far, but accept that trans people exist. This is a question. Look at the far right column there, because that's from 2022. 60% of US people in the US said, no, whatever the doctor said when you're born, that's what sex you are. So only 38% of people in the US said, no, I accept what trans people, that trans people exist. But which religious group is more accepting of trans identities? You could see, here's where atheists are. 76% of atheists accept trans people. I mean, that's still lower than I wish it was, but we're doing more on that front than any religious group that's there. Here's another one. What about the death penalty? Do you support or oppose the death penalty? Among all US adults, 39% of people oppose the death penalty. Only 39%, kind of depressing. But okay, where are atheists on this list? There we are. 65% of atheists oppose the death penalty. Find it barbaric, find it inhumane. More than any other religious group. And one last one here. This is before the vaccines were available for COVID. The question here on this survey from the Pew Research Center is, are you going to get the vaccine? This is before a lot of the anti-vaxxer nonsense steeped into public discourse. But are you going to get it? Because of course, are you going to get the vaccine isn't just, are you going to keep yourself safe? It's, do you care about the health of everyone around you, right? And overall, where are atheists on this list? 90% of atheists said, yeah, I'm definitely gonna get the vaccine, or like I think this was taken maybe right after they came out, or I've already gotten my first shot. Way higher than any other group. And again, this is not just selfish. This is not about protecting myself. This is, no, I wanna make sure that virus isn't hopping around. I don't want it to spread, so of course I'm gonna get it. So all of that, name your ethical issue. Religion, you name your religion, pick your religious identity. Overall, most of them are not doing a good job of showing we care when it comes to various ethical issues that are at the forefront of public discourse. But atheists, as unorganized as we are, seem to be on the progressive side of those things. And I think if you're a person who cares about these issues, even if you don't have a stake on religious identity, you see like, oh, the people who are not religious seem to be on the side of humanity and not whatever my church is doing. And I think that's a big reason these things are changing. Here's another thing I find really interesting. There are so many more atheists, non-religious people in the country now that it used to be, if you did a survey about religion, atheists weren't even a line on the survey because there were so few of us. We would be an asterisk. It said like, it's a small percentage. We couldn't get a good read on them. That's not true anymore. There are so many people doing research on the people in this room right now because they are dying to know who you are and like, what's your deal? This is a survey American Atheists did about just, now that there are so many atheists, what is it that motivates you, guides you? What do you think about various issues? I found this interesting too. The University of Kent had a multi-million-dollar grant to study unbelief around the world. Like they were able to fund research to answer so many questions. This was a few years ago. They're actually doing part 2 of it right now. It's called Explaining Atheism. I'm a consultant on this one, but it's the same deal. They got millions of dollars to fund research into atheism. And it was so successful in terms of learning things that they were like, hey, we would like millions of more dollars to do more research. And they got it, and they're doing it right now. Among the things they are studying now are like, what happens when your religious identity or non-religious identity is shaped by what's happening online? How do people living in countries where internet is not abundant, where you can't find Wi-Fi everywhere, how are those atheists figuring out that God doesn't exist? What happens when you're in, say, an overwhelmingly Muslim country, but you don't believe in God? How do you form communities like that? Because it's dangerous, but also, how do you get this information? Because you don't even have the internet. And again, very interesting questions that they're only able to study now because people want to know what's going on with atheists. And that's a huge change. Okay, this is something I find really interesting. We've talked about conventions like these, not just because of the pandemic. They don't happen as often as they used to. They just don't. There aren't as many, and when they are hosted, there aren't as many people coming to them, which sounds really depressing. And by the way, thank you for having me at this one. But does that mean people don't care about these issues? No, it doesn't. And the reason is, it is actually easier than ever to find communities that are talking about the things all of us care about. And this is interesting. I want to show you this picture. If you know the answer, don't say anything. How many of you know who the guy on the left is? Just raise your hand if you're familiar with the guy on the left. I see a few hands up here, and this is interesting because if you told me you were a former Jehovah's Witness, I have done this at parties because I'm a blast at parties. If someone says they're a former Jehovah's Witness, I'm like, oh, do you know who Lloyd is? He's the guy on the left. They look at me like, you know Lloyd? I'm like, yes, I know Lloyd. Who is Lloyd? He is a guy who talks about atheism online. And the reason you haven't heard of him is because he doesn't just talk about atheism. He does it as a former Jehovah's Witness. He doesn't talk about like whatever the God delusion talks about, like religion is wrong for XYZ reasons. He says, no, I watched what the Jehovah's Witnesses put out this week, because they put out videos like on a weekly basis and stuff, and I'm going to dissect what they did and why it's wrong. And if you're a former Jehovah's Witness or you're questioning it, this is the sort of thing you're going to come across if you go on YouTube. And this connects with former Jehovah's Witnesses in a way nothing else would. We can play this game again because I go to so many parties. Who is this guy? Raise your hand if you've ever seen him before. A few people, again. But if you're an ex-Mormon, you know who this guy is. His name is John DeLynn. He does a podcast and YouTube series, the Mormon Stories podcast, and it's the same thing. He talks about what's going on in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And again, if you're someone coming from that culture, that religion, he connects with you in a way Dawkins or Hitchens or any atheist just can't. We don't speak the same language. But if you watch this guy, he knows everything you were taught growing up. He knows what the problems with it are. And I promise you, more people are connecting to people like that than anyone else. By the way, we could play this game for communities of color, ex-Muslims, people who are African American. Like, they are finding people who grew up in their culture and talking about this stuff, if not on YouTube or in podcasts, then on TikTok or something else. That's how they're learning about this stuff, which is a huge change. I'll give you one more here. This is really interesting. That is genetically modified skeptic on the right. And that is Taylor, who goes by the anti-bot, who makes videos basically about fundamentalist Christianity. I'm telling you, the number of views these videos get are so much higher than just people talking about atheism. I want to show you a video here. There's one more I wanted to show you. This is a guy named Abraham Piper, and his father is a fundamentalist preacher named John Piper. Abraham does not believe as his father does. And I'm going to play you this video. It's the same concept. He is talking about things that people who grew up in like fundamentalist Christianity definitely understand, and maybe some of the references he makes are over your heads if you didn't grow up in the culture. But let's play this and see how this works for you.
My son had to wear a tie the other day, and I asked if he needed help. And of course his answer was, I know how to tie a tie, Dad. Which was news to me, because he's never really had a reason to wear one. I remember exactly when and why I learned to tie a tie. I was 10, and I was going on a missions trip by myself. What's a missions trip, you ask? It's a white savior's evangelical vacation that other people pay for. And the org I was going with required dressing up on Sundays and when interacting with the public. Thus the need to tie my own tie. This requirement was alongside memorizing the KJV, not talking to girls, and running a mile every morning. Oh, guess where the missions trip was too? One of the darkest places on earth. Florida! That's right, 10-year-old me and my cohort of other pre-adolescents took the message of Jesus and his ghastly demise to Orlando. I mean, if I had to guess who was going to get bathed in the blood of the Lamb, I would put my money on Florida, man. Why am I even telling you this? It's not even a story. Tying a tie, missions trip, Florida. I don't know. Suffice it to say, I look dapper as fuck doing my DC Talk puppet shows. All right, this is getting way too niche. I gotta go.
There are so many videos by people like him who, again, are growing up in the culture. They could speak the language. They know what you went through. Like, how many people here have seen the Book of Mormon musical? Yeah, a lot of people. You know who loves that musical? Mormons. Why? Because the inside jokes, they get them. They have talked about that with their friends, even if they are believers. Like, it's funny to them. And that makes a huge difference. Think about How many of you have read The God Delusion? And I'm just picking that because it's the most famous of the bunch. That book, I'm not even picking on Dawkins here, that book takes a superficial approach to religion and why it's wrong. That's not I'm not criticizing it. It has to. It's a book about why religion is wrong. It can't get nuanced for that reason. But at the time that it came out, it was like, well, this is what we have. It'll work. And the cool thing now is that everything can get more nuanced. People of color may not relate to Richard Dawkins, but they could relate to some of the people they see here. If you are coming from fundamentalist Christianity, if you're coming from Mormonism, Jehovah's Witnesses, maybe Dawkins doesn't work for you, but some of these people do. If you're a woman, some of the things the new atheists say, they don't connect to you. But hearing another woman talk about it, hearing a person of color talk about it, that stuff makes a difference. And I'm telling you, this is where so many people are getting their information now that maybe people like us don't see it, but it is happening. It is there. There are so many more people who are voices of atheism and criticizing religion than ever before, but they all have a lot smaller fan bases. You know what I mean? But that is a huge change, I think, in the right direction. And by the way, if you think about what happened 10, 15 years ago, you might have had a handful of atheist organizations or spokespeople with big quote hands, like American Atheists. And as a big nonprofit group, you have to be all things to everybody. And like, they can't be. There's no way to do that. And guess what? Now they don't have to be, because there are people who could speak on their behalf, who can connect with people. At the same time, it's not just a niche thing, because if you saw docuseries like Shiny Happy People that talked about the Duggar family and like their brand of Christianity, guess what? This is no longer just an atheist thing. This is like super popular. I forgot which service this one was on. But like, this gets seen by way more people than just our movement. And people are like, whoa, I didn't know any of that about the Duggars. This is another one on HBO called Savior Complex that was also very popular when it came out, about a young white woman who says, I'm going to go to Africa for a mission trip. And you know what? There are some sick kids here. I'm going to form like a hospital of sorts. What's her medical degree in? Nothing. Oh, and guess what happened? Lots of kids died. It's disturbing. And if you've ever heard of the phrase white savior complex, like, it very much goes into that. But the reason I bring this up is these things are popular, and it's not just popular among people like us. Like, this stuff is reaching a mainstream now in a way they never did before. And there's a huge difference between listening to like a new atheist versus watching something like this. This is also interesting. If you've ever been on Reddit before, there is a subreddit for atheism. It has lots of people. It might be a cesspool because it's the internet. But there is something very interesting on this subreddit that I don't know if all of you are familiar with, but I find it fascinating. At the very top of the atheism subreddit, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, trust me, it's okay. There is a little pull-down menu, and it says specifically, are you an ex whatever? What's your former religion? And there are I'll zoom in for you here. Are you an ex-Catholic, ex-Muslim, ex-Jew, ex-Christian, ex-Mormon, ex-Hindu? There's ex-Jehovah's Witness, ex-Baha'i. Why? Because the atheism subreddit may not be for you, because maybe they're talking about things that don't mean anything to you. But guess what? If you're an ex-Jehovah's Witness, if you're an ex-Muslim, there are things you are concerned about, you want to talk about, that the broader culture may not understand, but it means a lot. This is a screenshot. I'll come back to that in a second. But I'm telling you, those forums for people who are saying, I'm coming out of a specific group and I want to connect with people who are also leaving the same cult or the same religion, whatever it was, it means so much more. Those subreddits are fascinating insights into what's going on in their communities, if you've ever had a chance to look at them. And they're so interesting. My favorite one on Reddit, this is Fundy Snark Uncensored, which is just ripping on fundamentalist Christian purity culture stuff. And the people who promote it online, like, they have nicknames for all the people talking about purity culture and stuff. It's fantastic. While we're talking about those individual things, this is like a billboard placed by ex-Muslims of North America. Because it's not enough to say, oh, there's nothing up in the skies except clouds or whatever it is. Like, that connects with some people, but guess what? Nearly 1 in 4 Muslims raised in the US have left Islam. Hey, if you're one of those people, maybe you're curious and you want to learn more. This is a group called Footsteps. Have you heard of this nonprofit organization? It is specifically for people leaving Orthodox Judaism, because Dawkins won't connect with those people. Dawkins doesn't know what they went through. People like Dawkins don't know what they've been through. But if you were raised in Orthodox Judaism and you know the pitfalls and how hard it is to leave that insular community, there's a nonprofit that's designed to help you out. Fascinating stuff. Those subcultures, subcommunities are growing rapidly, and it just shows like, yeah, there's a way to talk about this stuff, but it helps to have people who grew up in it. Fascinating. One totally different thing I've also seen, a big change in how activism has worked over the past few decades. It used to be like, oh, American Atheist has a take on some church-state separation issue. Maybe it's in front of the Supreme Court or some other court, and as atheists, we have a position on this. And then that group would just file a brief with the Supreme Court, an amicus brief, like they would do it alone, because who's going to partner with them on anything? These days, that doesn't happen. This is an example. This is the Dobbs, when the Dobbs decision was in front of the Supreme Court, which later overturned Roe v. Wade, a lot of groups said, we have a vested interest in the outcome. We want the Supreme Court justices to know how we feel about it and the legal arguments we feel are on our side. Did the justices listen? No. But look at who signed on to this particular set of arguments, because if you see who signed off on it at the bottom of this particular one, you have Americans United for Separation of Church and State, American Humanist Association, okay, church-state separation groups, humanist groups, who else? A Jewish Partnership for Justice, Interfaith Alliance Foundation, all coming together on this one. Let me show you another one. This is another Supreme Court case, Shurtleff v. Boston. It involved a Christian flag outside Boston City Hall and whether that was legal to put up. But again, look who signed off on this one, because a lot of people had a take on this. This is the list of people signing on to this. You have, I'm just picking at random here, Hindu American Foundation, Jewish Social Policy Action Network, Men of Reformed Judaism. What's on the next page here? American Atheists, American Humanist Association, Americans United for Separation of Church and State. All of these groups are saying, listen, we disagree about stuff. You get a couple drinks in us, we will have a lot of things to argue about. But on this issue, we all feel the same way. And if we can all agree that you should rule a certain way, maybe it'll carry a little more weight. More of the nonprofit atheist humanist groups that have legal teams, American Atheists, American Humanist Association, Freedom from Religion Foundation, Americans United for Separation of Church and State, I cannot tell you how much they now work with progressive religious groups when it comes to fighting for these causes. And those groups are willing to work with them, which did not happen in the past. That's a huge change. And this stuff has an impact because when they work together, people listen. This is a paper that was put out after the January 6th insurrection in Washington, saying you can't talk about what happened on January 6th without talking about the influence of Christian nationalism. And it wasn't just an atheist project that did this. A lot of groups came together and said, you have to talk about the influence of Christian nationalism. And because they worked together, this got coverage. This is an article from Religion News Service, a wire service. Scholars, activists, brief lawmakers on role of Christian nationalism at insurrection. Here's the Washington Post headline about the same issue, how the Capitol attacks helped spread Christian nationalism in the extreme right. It is so persuasive and such a big deal. I want to show you a speech made on the floor of the U.S. House, and tell me when the last time you saw a speech like this given. It takes a second, but I promise you it's worth it. This is Representative Jared Huffman of California. He's the only openly humanist member of Congress. Listen to what he said on the floor of the House.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to bring attention to a dangerous ideology threatening our democracy. White Christian nationalism. Most members of Congress don't even know what it means, but experts from the Freedom from Religion Foundation and the Baptist Joint Committee for Religious Liberty have studied it for years, and their new report shows this movement was at the heart of the January 6th insurrection. White Christian nationalism fuses Christianity with a rigid view of civic life, a view that true Americans are white, native-born, and conservative. On January 6th, it was the connective tissue that tied disparate groups together and propelled them to action. It's infecting our government, from members of Congress and top officials in the previous administration to the wife of a Supreme Court justice whose messages to the president's chief of staff leading up to the insurrection smacked of white Christian nationalism. Thankfully, good Americans, people of faith and non-believers, are standing up to this violent ideology. I call on members of Congress to educate themselves about white Christian nationalism and reaffirm the separation of church and state. I yield back.
Oh my God. Again, I watch way too much C-SPAN. You don't hear speeches like that very often, but that's happening because there is a push, not just from people like us, because I think people would ignore it if it was just people like us, but because we have more allies than ever before. Here's another version of that. Jared Huffman, who you just saw speak, helped launch the Congressional Free Thought Caucus. It kind of responds to the Prayer Caucus that has hundreds of members. I pulled this up like months ago, and then I looked at the new list last week of how many members of Congress are involved in this Free Thought Caucus, which is not promoting atheism, but they say we support church-state separation. We want public policy based on data and not some religious view, things like that. This list grew since last week. There are now 23 members of Congress, 22 of whom are religious, saying, yeah, I back all of that. That sounds great. And again, this is something I feel like politics 20 years ago, they wouldn't want any association with non-religious people, openly so. And now here's a bunch of people saying, oh yeah, I'm willing to go on the record and say I support atheists, church-state separation, things like that. And I know this is not a political speech here, but atheists that were involved in our movement on boards of nonprofit groups, they are now running for office themselves. This is Sarah Henry. She's running for the Florida State House. This is someone who grew up in the same circles we all exist in, who's saying, okay, I care about this stuff, but the way I can make an impact is by running for office. And that's what she is doing now. That's amazing. I want to show you, I got a few more minutes here. I'm going to show you a couple more videos that I think you're going to like. This is an interesting one. This is Megan Hunt. She is a Nebraska state senator. And she is, Nebraska is the one weird state that doesn't have a House and a Senate. They just have a state Senate. I'll set up the scene for you. Last year, they were going to outlaw in vitro fertilization. They had the votes to do it. The conservatives in that state Senate had the votes to do it. The only thing that could stop them is basically a filibuster in the state Senate. Megan Hunt, who is openly atheist, said, I'm not going to let you do it. I'm going to use whatever power I have. But she filibustered for a long while, and this gets better the more you watch as she gets more tired.
We will do everything that we can to make sure that this extreme abortion bill does not pass in Nebraska. Today, Christian religious extremists, let's call it what it is, are trying to pass a forced birth bill in Nebraska to cut off abortion services, including for victims of rape and incest and child abuse, with no exception for the life of the mother. It should worry us, colleagues, and it should worry us Nebraskans, how often we have to debate human rights and dignity, and how we have conceded that there's a debate to even have. The fact that my reproductive destiny, that my fertility, that my rights to control my own body, and every other woman in this chamber is even up for debate is something I can't believe we have conceded as a culture. When we talk about the rights of trans children to exist, that's not debatable. When we talk about reproductive rights and reproductive justice, that's not debatable. When we talk about marriage equality, that's not debatable. When we talk about the rights of immigrants to work and drive and go to the doctor, that's not debatable. Let people live, leave people alone, and trust people in Nebraska to do what's best for them and their families and their lives, and that we have even ceded that these questions are debatable should concern us all. Proponents of this bill have no shame left. I will cherish the time that I have worked here forever, but when I am term limited, I will probably not talk to most of you ever again. That's just reality. You're not my friends, you're my coworkers. If you think my 11-year-old should be forced to give birth, you are not my friend. Let me explain to you how it's going to go down if this bill moves forward today to select file. If this moves forward, the first thing that will happen is I'll open on a motion to indefinitely postpone the election law bill that's coming up next. If this bill moves, colleagues, that bill doesn't move. In life, sometimes we go through things where we have to draw a boundary. It is healthy for me, as a mother, as a rape survivor, to draw a boundary and say, if you think that my child should be forced to give birth, you are not my friend. And if I go to the pearly gates and meet your God someday, which sounds great, I hope I do, I don't think I'm going to get in any trouble for killing all of your bills who vote for this. I don't think your God's going to have any problem with that. And I don't think I'm going to see any of you there either. Thank you, Mr. President.
And guess what? She got the number of people she needed to override that bill last year. So, and by the way, I want to show you one last one. I'll be done with videos after that. This is Mallory McMorrow. She is a state senator from Michigan. She went publicly and said she supports LGBTQ students and supporting their rights. And her political opponent, or one of the Republicans in that state Senate, started putting out advertisements calling her a groomer. And so this is her response to that. And mind you, she is religious. I want you to hear the response she gave.
I am a straight, white, Christian, married, suburban mom. I want my daughter to know that she is loved, supported, and seen for whoever she becomes. I want her to be curious, empathetic, and kind. People who are different are not the reason that our roads are in bad shape after decades of disinvestment, or that healthcare costs are too high, or that teachers are leaving the profession. I want every child in this state to feel seen, heard, and supported, not marginalized and targeted because they are not straight, white, and Christian.
Yeah. Again, the reason I'm showing you all this is to say there used to be a time when being an atheist was taboo, especially in politics. That doesn't seem to be the case anymore. If you want to see my spreadsheet of how many openly non-religious state-level lawmakers are in the United States, it grows every 2 years when they have elections because people aren't running away from that word. But more importantly, we have more allies than we ever did before, not because people are necessarily drawn to atheism, but because they're so turned off by what people are doing with their religion, and that's a huge sea change from several years ago. So I'll leave you with one final thing. I love crossword puzzles. I love doing them. I love writing them. If you do the New York Times crossword, I'll have the Friday puzzle in 2 weeks. But the reason I bring that up is if you write crossword puzzles, there is a database you can use to see how many times certain words have been used in the past, how they were clued, things like that. It's a great resource if you're making puzzles. And like, if you don't know anything about crosswords, here's what you got to know. The New York Times is the king of crossword puzzles. If you write crosswords, that's where you want it published, which also means they have a lot of sway in how things get clued, what words they say count. There's been controversy because maybe a foreign name or something that sounds black doesn't get used, but certain white names are overused. If you want to get a drink in me, I will bore your head off about that stuff. But here's the thing, like, it's the New York Times. Their average readership is like 97 years old. So it's interesting to see. It's interesting to see how they clue certain words. And this is a database of how they clued the word G-O-D, which, by the way, if you write crosswords, that's a great word. Has common letters. It's only 3 letters. You can use that a lot. This is how they used to clue the word God between 1994 and 1999. And you could see, like, the Almighty, Yeah, that's a clue for God. Word on all US coins. Praise be to blank. Okay, fine. Those are inoffensive, common ways to try to get the solver to guess God. Here's what's happened since then. Because again, as this cultural shift is taking place, you realize you don't have to appease, the cult conservative sensibilities of the sort of people who would do crossword puzzles. Here's what they've done since 2014, just to pick a date. Word added to the Pledge of Allegiance in 1954. I love this one in the middle, if you could see it. Word in the Declaration of Independence, but not the Constitution. There's another one. Oh, wow. One of two words added to the Pledge of Allegiance in 1954. Roll for George Burns, Morgan Freeman, and Whoopi Goldberg. That's a good one. And a lot of Greek mythology in there too. I think if the New York Times and the people who run that puzzle are willing to say, you know what, we're fine. We're not going to offend anyone with any of that. If they can make the change, I think that shows you how the culture is shifting in a direction I think a lot of us have been fighting for a long time. So I'll stop there. If you are interested in any of my stuff, that's my website. That's me. You can reach out to me later. Thank you again for having me. Yeah.
Just going to retreat here. Given the popularity of atheism on YouTube and on podcasts, what is the role of atheist conventions now?
Yeah.
Are people getting their unbelief fixed much more online than in the real world?
Yeah, that's such a good question. That phrase, atheist fix, is this sort of thing important? If there weren't podcasts, if there weren't YouTube channels, this sort of thing becomes super relevant, because if you are literally a new atheist, one of the things you want to do is talk to people about these things. You want to hear what some of these speakers have to say in a way where you don't have to feel like you have to guard yourself, watch over your shoulder to see who's seeing you. So that's why these sorts of conventions are important. The fact that you could do it from the comfort of your own home now, because there are so many podcasts and YouTubers and all that stuff, yes, this sort of convention becomes less important, but at the same time, all of us know, I don't know about you, even though I talk about this stuff, write about this stuff full time, I don't talk about this in person with people very much, because I'm very guarded about who I would talk about this stuff with. In a room like this, I feel like my guard is down, and there's a relief in that. So even if it's not huge, even if this isn't the only way you're going to run into atheists anymore, there is something really amazing to be able to discuss this stuff without feeling like you have to apologize for what it is that you believe or don't believe in. You can make fun of stuff that is ridiculous and silly without feeling like you're going to offend anybody. There is value to that. There is value in having this community. And again, it's not just meeting other people. It's if something happens, let's say in Calgary, where there is a church-state separation issue, where there is a relevant issue that a lot of people in this room might be interested in, this community is going to be the starting point for how you create that change. And you can't form that community always on the basis of we're all in a Facebook group together, maybe there's some connection. No, when you know each other face to face, you're going to be able to make these connections a lot quicker and create change a lot more. So that's why these are important still.
Thanks, Hemant. We have one more question. The Congress People for Separation of Church and State, I think you have a slide about this, so what is the party breakdown of the signatories?
On church states, the party breakdown of which part? The church-state separation, like the Congressional Free Thought Caucus, there are 23 members of the Congressional Free Thought Caucus. All 23 are Democrats. And if you look at all of Congress, I think it's the Pew Research Center, every 2 years when the new Congress is sworn in, they publish a recap of the religious affiliation of every member of Congress. And if I recall correctly, from 2020, the beginning of 2023, when they swore in the latest Congress, literally, Jared Huffman was listed as a humanist. That's the guy who was talking about that from the House floor. He was listed as a humanist. Senator Kyrsten Sinema from Arizona, she was listed as unaffiliated. And everyone else was either like, don't know, refuse to answer. There were like a couple dozen members of Congress who were like, don't know, refuse to answer, but didn't say anything more. On the Republican side, virtually, I think maybe one person was don't know, refuse to answer. Everyone else was some religious affiliation. Now, I think if people are retiring, as a lot of members of Congress are now, like, hey, I don't care what party you are. This is a good time to say, oh, by the way, I'm not religious. Like, come on out and do it. You're not running again. But also, we are seeing more people at the state and federal level run for office, and maybe they don't use the word atheist, but they will say, I'm spiritual but not religious. I'm a former something. I'm culturally Christian. Some weasel word that like, we all know what you mean, but maybe a lot of other people don't. But they say it because people are curious about it. But even if they're non-religious, by the way, just to be clear, every one of those people, if you ever hear them speak about their faith or someone asks them about it, one is that they'll say, oh yeah, I'm not religious, but again, I want to be a member of whatever because I want to fight for you. And that doesn't matter if you're religious or not because I want to be your representative. They know how to politics that thing. The other thing that's interesting is, and I have tracked this as best I can over several years, even when people run for office and they're non-religious, the number of attack ads used against them because of that is virtually non-existent, which is amazing. Like, it's such a, you are looking for any leverage you can against your opponent. You would think if they're openly non-religious, it would be like easy to run an attack ad on it. I think a lot of people realize if I go after this person for being non-religious, it's going to backfire on me because guess what? A lot of voters are too. And why would you want to attack those voters? So like, it's not even a good attack point for people who don't want to see that. So amazing change. And maybe we'll start to see more people openly come out as like explicitly non-religious. It'll happen soon.
Thank you so much,
Yeah.
for your wise words.
Thank you.